For decades, scientists argued over one stubborn question that shaped our entire understanding of human history. When did humans first reach the Americas? For most of the 20th century, the answer stayed the same. The standard story claimed that people crossed from Siberia into Alaska about 13,000 years ago. These people then moved south through a narrow gap between massive ice sheets. This idea, known as Clovis first, felt solid because stone tools called Clovis points appeared across North America at exactly that time. The dates lined up neatly. The story felt finished. However, a deep unease never went away because the evidence was never quite perfect. The ice-free corridor those people were supposed to use was actually blocked by glaciers for longer than expected. Some archaeological sites looked much older than Clovis, but they were often dismissed as errors or accidents. This mystery remained open for 80 years, leaving a gap in the timeline of our species. No one could close it without leaving room for doubt. This uncertainty mattered because it affected how we understood human adaptability, the speed of migration, and our ancestors' survival under extreme conditions. For professionals who value finishing problems and closing loops, this was an unfinished equation. Now that equation finally balances. We have the definitive answer. The place that finally forced the issue and settled the debate is White Sands National Park in southern New Mexico. Today, the park looks like a sea of white gypsum dunes stretching for miles. It is quiet, dry, and empty. But 23,000 years ago, during the coldest part of the last ice age, this area looked entirely different. At that time, massive ice sheets covered much of North America, and sea levels were about 400 feet lower than they are today. A large body of water called Lake Otero filled the basin. Lush grasslands surrounded the water. Mammoths, giant ground sloths, camels, and dire wolves moved across the shore. This environment was a productive ecosystem, not a desert. For years, researchers found fossilized tracks of these extinct animals. Then, they found something that changed the entire narrative of human history. They discovered human footprints pressed into the same mud as the tracks of Ice Age giants. These were not just a few stray marks. They were hundreds of footprints representing men, women, and many children. The discovery of these prints provided a direct physical link to the past that stone tools could never match. To understand why this discovery provides closure, we must look at how the evidence was verified. Scientists used radiocarbon dating, which is a method that measures the decay of carbon-14 isotopes to determine the age of organic material. In the footprints, researchers found seeds from an ancient aquatic plant called Ruppia serosa. Because the seeds were trapped within the layers of mud forming the footprints, they acted as a biological time capsule. When the first results came back, they showed the seeds were between 21,000 and 23,000 years old. This was the first major reveal. It suggested humans were in New Mexico 10,000 years earlier than the Clovis theory allowed. This discovery connects separate findings from the 1990s and 2010s into one coherent timeline. The pieces of the puzzle finally fit together. However, extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof, and the scientific community initially resisted these dates. Critics argued that the seeds could have absorbed old carbon from the lake water, making them appear older than they actually were. This created a period of tension where the answer seemed within reach but remained unproven. The resolution of this tension came through a massive, multi-year verification process. To prove the dates were accurate, the team needed a second independent method of dating. They turned to palynology, which is the study of ancient pollen grains. They isolated thousands of pollen grains from the exact same sediment layers as the footprints. Specifically, they looked at pollen from conifers, which are trees like pines and firs. Unlike the aquatic seeds, tree pollen comes from the air and does not suffer from the old carbon effect. They also used a third method called optically stimulated luminescence. This technique measures the last time individual grains of quartz were exposed to sunlight. If all three methods pointed to the same age, the case would be closed. This is the evidence hierarchy in action. You start with the footprints, move to the seeds, verify with pollen, and confirm with light-based dating. This systematic approach ensures that the results are not a fluke or a measurement error. The investigation then moved to multiple independent laboratories to ensure there was no bias. 3 separate labs in different parts of the world ran the tests on the pollen and the quartz grains. This is institutional credibility at work. The results were published in the journal Science, which is one of the most prestigious scientific publications in the world. Each lab produced identical results. The pollen dates matched the seed dates perfectly. The luminescence dating confirmed the sediment layers had not been disturbed for over 20,000 years. The timeline was now mapped with absolute precision. We now know that humans were living in the heart of North America during the last glacial maximum, which was the peak of the Ice Age when glaciers were at their largest extent. This happened 23,000 years ago, which is 10,000 years before the Clovis people supposedly arrived. The decades-long mystery is now solved. The debate is over. This discovery does more than just move a date on a calendar. It completes the picture of how humans moved across the globe. We used to think of the first Americans as a single group of hunters, chasing mammoths through a narrow opening in the ice. Now we know the real story. Humans arrived much earlier, likely traveling along the Pacific coast by boat or walking along the shoreline. They were already established in New Mexico while the ice sheets were still at their thickest. This means they didn't wait for the ice to melt to find a home. They were already here, thriving in a world of giant sloths and mammoths. This is your origin story. It proves that human ancestors were capable of surviving in extreme cold and navigating unfamiliar landscapes long before civilization began. Your ancestors were among those who survived these harsh conditions, and that resilience is part of the human inheritance. This information is the cutting edge of archaeology. Most people still believe the old 13,000-year timeline they learned in school. You now know the real story before it reaches the textbooks. The smoking gun evidence that settled the case was the physical relationship between the tracks. In several locations, human footprints were found inside the tracks of a giant ground sloth. The sloth had stepped in the mud, and moments later, a human had stepped directly into the sloth's footprint. In some cases, the sloth had then turned around and stepped over the human tracks. This proves the humans and the extinct animals were standing on that ground at the same time. You cannot wash in a footprint. You cannot have a footprint from a different era accidentally appear inside the track of an animal that went extinct 10,000 years ago. The evidence is fixed in time. The layers of Earth show exactly what was deposited first. This is called stratigraphy, where older material stays at the bottom and newer material sits on top. The footprints were found in layers deep beneath the surface, covered by thousands of years of sediment. The sequence is now mapped. The chaos is organized. We can now reconstruct the daily lives of these people with high confidence. The footprints at White Sands show calm movement, repeated visits, and a complex social structure. Many of the tracks belong to teenagers and small children. One set of tracks shows a person carrying a heavy load, likely a child, for a long distance. You can see where they shifted the weight from one hip to the other. You can see where they set the child down in the mud to rest and then picked them up again. This was not a desperate dash into unknown territory. This was daily life. They understood the tides of the lake, the behavior of the animals, and the seasonal changes of the wetlands. They were adaptable and skilled. They were not just surviving, they were living. This discovery changes how we understand human speed and migration. If humans were in New Mexico 23,000 years ago, they must have entered the continent even earlier, perhaps 25,000 or 30,000 years ago. The timeline is now whole. The evidence for this early arrival is not limited to White Sands. This discovery connects with other sites that previously seemed like outliers. For example, at Rimrock Draw in Oregon, archaeologists found stone tools beneath a layer of volcanic ash. They used tephrochronology, which is the study of volcanic ash layers, to date the site. The ash came from an eruption of Mount St. Helens that occurred 15,600 years ago. Because the tools were underneath the ash, they had to be older. Further analysis of camel teeth found at the site gave a date of 18,250 years ago. Before White Sands, many scientists were skeptical of the Oregon find. Now the two sites form a consistent pattern, 23,000 years ago in New Mexico and 18,000 years ago in Oregon. The dots are connected. The gap in knowledge is filled. We have a complete sequence of human occupation that stretches back into the heart of the Ice Age. The methodology used to extract this information shows the rigor of modern science. To ensure the DNA of the environment was understood, researchers analyzed the sediments for ancient proteins. They used mass spectrometry, which is a technique that identifies the chemical composition of a sample by measuring the mass-to-charge ratio of its ions. This allowed them to confirm the presence of specific animals like the ancient camel and the dire wolf, even where bones were not present. They also analyzed the stable isotopes in the sediment. Isotopes are different forms of the same element that have different numbers of neutrons. By measuring the ratio of oxygen isotopes, they could determine the exact temperature of the lake water when the footprints were made. This level of detail removes all ambiguity. We aren't guessing about the environment, we have measured it. The existential implication of this is profound. We once thought humans were late arrivals to the Americas, almost missing their chance before the environment changed. Now we know we were a permanent part of the Ice Age ecosystem. We were there for the peak of the cold, the melting of the glaciers, and the extinction of the megafauna. This survival story is a testament to human ingenuity. If the population had been smaller or less adaptable, they might not have survived the thousands of years of isolation in a frozen world. Genetic analysis, which maps ancestry by comparing DNA sequences, shows that these early populations underwent a bottleneck. A bottleneck occurs when a population is greatly reduced in size, limiting genetic diversity. Your DNA contains the markers of these survivors. Out of perhaps 10,000 individuals who first crossed into the Americas, an entire continent was populated. You are the result of that successful expansion. The question that puzzled scientists for nearly a century is answered. The Clovis first theory is officially replaced by a much older, more complex, and more interesting history. We now know humans arrived at least 23,000 years ago. We know they lived alongside giant ground sloths and mammoths. We know they raised families on the shores of ancient lakes. We know they used sophisticated dating and verification methods to prove it. The debate is over. The evidence is airtight. 3 independent labs, 3 different dating methods, and physical footprints that cannot be faked. This is what definitive closure looks like in science. The story of human origins in the Americas is no longer a mystery. It is a documented fact. The final piece of the puzzle came from looking at the broader global context. At the same time these people were walking in New Mexico, other human groups were moving through Siberia and Europe. Genetic comparisons show that the people at White Sands were related to the ancestral populations in East Asia. By sequencing the genomes of ancient remains found elsewhere, scientists have proven that the migration was not a single event, but a series of movements over thousands of years. This completes the system. We have the source population in Asia, the travel route along the coast, and the destination in the American Southwest. Everything is accounted for. There are no more missing links in the basic timeline of arrival. Scientists have closed this case. The White Sands footprints provide the kind of proof archaeology rarely gets. It is direct, physical, and anchored in time by multiple independent methods. These traces do not suggest a presence, they demonstrate it. They do not hint at a date, they fix it. The uncertainty that plagued the field for 80 years has evaporated. We have moved from maybe to we know. The satisfaction of this completion is immense because it allows us to stop asking when and start asking how. How did they manage the cold? How did they hunt? How did they organize their societies? Those are the questions of a settled field, not a mystery. The timeline of North America is now complete. The story, at last, is whole. We have the complete picture of our arrival on this continent, and it is a story of resilience that began 10,000 years earlier than we ever imagined. The case is settled. The evidence has spoken. We now know the truth of our origins in the New World.